3 lines above where it says Maxwell. The word Haggadah comes from the mitzvah, one of the mitzvot of the Seder, V'gadato levincha bayom ahu leimor, and you shall tell over to your children on this day, saying. The Rambam says that there are 2 mitzvot when it comes to the Pesach Seder, outside of the mitzvot of eating. There are 2 mitzvot of the Seder itself. One is the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, the detailing the story of the Exodus, and the other is V'higadato levincha bayom ahu leimor, and you tell over to your child or your children on that day, saying. They really sound synonymous, but they're 2 different experiences. Sipur is a tale, a story. Repeating, intervening, placing yourself into the history and the learning as much as possible. Because the Seder and the Haggadah is filled with learning, the Talmud Torah. But there's a second aspect to it as well, the impact that it has upon yourself. To see, as we say in the Haggadah, Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo, a person is obligated to see oneself as if they themselves at this moment are going forth from the land of Egypt. Included within the mitzvah of the Seder is the obligation to close your eyes, not to fall asleep, but to view yourself as if you are now taking this trek out of Mitzrayim. We'll see from the context of the Seder that that is not so difficult, because the Seder exists on a double edge, which we'll discuss. If you look at the word Haggadah, the middle letters of the word Haggadah are Gimel and Dalet. There are 2 Heys. Those of you in my other Chumash classes know that the Hey is a reference to what? To God revealing Himself to the world. As the Maharal explains, the Hey has an opening on top, a smaller opening on top, and a large opening on the bottom. And it's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as if God is peering through the heavens and reveals Himself in the brilliant light that portrays itself down at the bottom. That's the letter Hey. The Hey always represents God's revealing or revelation of Himself, of His being, of His holiness to the rest of the world. That's why the Hey, the 5, is found within the 5 books of Moses, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. But we also know that the 5 books of Moses are really 7. How are there 7 books? Not counting the New Testament. How are there 7 books? Because there's a din, the Gemara learns out, that Vayihi ben Sarah ha'aron, that there is a separate part, and if you look in the Chumash, you'll find double nuns inverted, that in Vayihi ben Sarah ha'aron, when there's a reference to the Jewish people carrying the Aron, carrying the Ark, that's considered to be a separate parsha. So it breaks up the parsha Bamidbar into being 3 svarim, the beginning of Bamidbar, Vayihi ben Sarah, and the end of Bamidbar, which therefore transforms the 5 books of Moshe. If you take that Gemara, transfers it into being 7, an additional 2. And therefore, we have 2 very important numbers that come from the Chumash. The 5 of God's revealing of Himself to the world, and the 7, our means of experiencing in the context of this world, reaching up the bridge to heaven. And the number 7, therefore the Shabbat, is always considered to be, the 7th day, the Shabbat, is always considered to be the bridge between heaven and earth. If you want to feel Shamayim, if you want to feel heaven, it lies in the context of a Shabbat. 7 is always a number that references this bridge, how we're able to accomplish reaching through the Torah, reaching the highest reaches, the highest realms of heaven. Therefore we have 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos. Again, the statement of our ability. God reveals Himself with the number 5, with the Hey, but we have the capacity to climb on the bridge, to use the 6. The 6 represents the physical world, the 6 days of creation, to use the number 6 to reach the highest levels of heaven. And the word, you following what I'm saying? If you look at the Haggadah, there are 2 Heys, 2 statements of God's revelation to us, and in the middle, the Gimel and the Dalet, the 3 and the 4, which is 7, together representing our ability to reach upward to God. And it's no accident, therefore, that the Jewish people were created by 3 and 4. How are we created by 3, 4? 3 are the mothers and 4 are the... No, the other way around. 3 are the fathers and 4 are the mothers, and right? But it goes back, when it goes backwards, 4 are the mothers and 3 are the fathers and 2 are the lukos that Moshe dropped. You know how to do that with me? That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. We'll be showing the video later.
I can do the song for you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's for the end of the end of the class next week. Mitzvah Hashem. That'll be the kickoff of the Nirtza. Right after we finish eating the afikomen, you can break into the song. So we have a combination of 3 and 4, and in the Haggadah, when we play that little numbers game at the end of the Haggadah, it's not a game. Each one of these numbers has its relevance to the creation and the motif of Klal Yisrael. So we have the 5 and the 3 and the 4. The 3 and the 4 representing how we can find the bridge back to God. And the 5, how God constantly reveals himself to us. If you look at the Seder itself, at the format of the Seder, we see that this comes up in many ways. Let's start with a very famous question as a means of introducing the Seder. The Seder is divided up into 2 parts. There's the first part and the second part. Following so far?
That much I get.
Before the Seudah, before the meal, we have an entire, very large section of the Seder, and we begin the prayer of the Hallel. Right? If you look on page 26, you see the Hallel prayer. Then, right after the beginning of the Hallel, we have the 2 paragraphs of Hallel. We make a bracha, and then we begin the preparation towards the matzah. We wash our hands, we eat the matzah, we eat the maror, we eat the sandwich. Then we have the meal, and then right after the meal, we have Shvocha Moschel HaGoyim, pour out your wrath to the nations, and then we go back to the Hallel. We conclude the Hallel with Lo Lanu Hashem, Lo Lanu. And the question is, a very, very famous question, why do we break up the Hallel into 2 parts? Why do we introduce the meal into the middle of the Hallel? And if you think about it, the aspect of the meal really began at the very beginning of the Seder and works its way through the entire Seder. Now, for Jews, we know that eating is a national pastime. But what exactly is the relevance of symbolizing and attaining a statement of freedom through the process of eating? Why is there such a connection between eating and the expression of freedom that's found in the Seder? So much that the meal is, rather than just being a simple Shabbos or Yom Tov meal, which is also a mitzvah, actually becomes a part of the order of the Seder. Shulchan Aruch, the setting and the preparation, the eating of the meal, is part of the mitzvah of the Seder. It's not because Uncle Lou is hungry that we have the meal in the middle. The meal is part of the Haggadah, part of the Seder. And the question is why? And why is the matzah, the maror, the wine, why so much of a statement or a manifestation of freedom in the context of eating? Why?
What kind of freedom? Be able to eat when you want or what you want.
Okay. But you can't eat what you want. There are very, very well regimented laws of what you eat, how you eat it, as we were discussing yesterday in our class about the laws of the Seder. The din of reclining and how much you have to eat and when you eat it. Now, and you can't just decide after your 3rd cup of wine, I'm going to have another cup of wine. That's good. You can't do that. It's very well regimented. It seems to be the opposite of freedom. But in a word, eating represents the ability to take God's world and rather than shrink from it, to ingest it al pi halakha, to ingest it according to the laws of the Torah, to serve God. A great deal of the Seder is this capacity, this partnership that God gave us to be with the world, to unify with the world, and to use that to serve God. So there's a great deal of eating and other activities that take place in the Seder, which means and stands for our ability to feel freedom by participating in God's world according to His way. And if you think about it, the whole word Seder almost seems like the antithesis of the mistaken view of freedom. Seder means order. It's regimented. You think if you'd have a celebration of freedom, you get into a hot tub someplace, you bring the guitar, and you kind of express. Everyone should express what hey man, what's freedom to you? It says, what? Yeah, that's the Californian Seder. You go, you get a You take a few avocado, take an avocado dip, you dip the mountains avocado dip, and that's, and you get laid back. And you express freedom. That should be the ultimate expression of freedom. Not for a Jew. Not for a Jew. When what you do as a statement of freedom in the context of Jewish life is you express freedom as a Jew, you express freedom with Seder, with order. What does order do when you have order in front of you? Order gives you the ability to analyze, to participate fully, to investigate, to define. When man was put in the world, the first thing he did was categorize the animal world. He had to define, he had to analyze, he had to interpret. The purpose of Seder is to arrange things. Sure, each one of us brings within the context of the Seder our own understandings and our own experiences and our own Torah knowledge. But on the other hand, the fact that every single home all over the Jewish world, the night of the 14th, the night after the 14th of Nisan, beginning of the 15th of Nisan, the Seder is beginning. That's a statement of Jewish freedom. Our connection to our people, our connection to each other, and our connection to God in a way that we can understand all of the details of His world. Not to be laid back and not think, but rather the opposite, to be directed. And in that direction from God, we find our ultimate freedom, the ability to confront ourselves and to think. So we have the two parts of the Seder. We have one Hallel and we have another Hallel. Why? Because the Hallel that takes place prior to the meal is the Hallel of the experience of Egypt. And if you look at that Hallel, on page 26 in the Memhei Haggadah, that stands for Maxwell House, like Manishtano, right? The Hallel that's emphasized here is B'tseis Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, as the Jewish people left Egypt. That's the Hallel that references the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. But the Hallel after the Seder, we start before the Hallel, Shlo Chamos al Hagoyim. Pour out your wrath on those who don't know you, your oppressors, those who oppress your nation. Shlo Chamos al Hagoyim Misholo Yidu'ucha. Then we ask and we praise God, not for what was, but what for will be, the future redemption of the Jewish people. I'd like to just demonstrate this theme in the beginning of the Seder. The very beginning of the Seder, we have a very perplexing, complex paragraph. The Seder starts out with Kiddush. We'll just go through the ropes. Kiddush is what? Kiddush is our ability to sanctify the time that God gave us. And that is Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. When did God give us the commandment to sanctifying time? It was the first statement of freedom for the Jew. The first mitzvah, what we read in the Torah this past week. You make time, you consecrate time, you make it holy, because otherwise time will defeat you. If you don't become the master of time, you'll find yourself slipping, and it will slip through your fingers and you will not live life. But if you consecrate it, if you establish it, if you make it holy, God said, then you're my partner. And God is an eternal partner, giving us eternality into ourselves, marrying us to the infinite. So the Kiddush is a statement of freedom for a Jew. God gave me importance. God said, here's a date, but unless you sanctify it, it's missing something. If I don't make Kiddush, this Yom Tov, if I don't decide when the Yom Tov is going to be, and I don't make a Kiddush, there's something missing in Yom Tov. In God's Yom Tov. In God's world. That means every single one of us have consequence. We're all the partners of Hashem. And that's the first statement that we make. Not just because we make Kiddush before the meal, but because Kadesh is a part of the Haggadah, the part that tells us why we should strive for this bridge to God. Because it's consequential to God. Nothing else matters. All the little things. How big the house is, how big the car is, how big you are, doesn't matter, I hope. What does matter is how consequential you can be in His world. How much you can hook up, combined with the infinite. So that's Kaddish. Then we go through Orchatz. After we make Kiddush on Friday night, what do? We go and wash our hands. We make a motzi. We make a bracha over washing our hands. We make a motzi. However, we don't do that this night. We wash our hands and we don't make a bracha. Right? And the kid looks at you and says, that's not what my Rebbe told me, right? Oh, Abba doesn't know. But you tell him, no, you don't make a bracha. And he figures, oh, We're liberal now. And then you go ahead, instead of taking matzah, he sees you're starting to roll up something green. Some people use endive, some people use parsley, some people use potato. A little bit, you make a bracha bori pri adama. And he says, that's strange. Why do we take a vegetable? Vegetable represents springtime. Pesach is the only Yom Tov, is the only festival where the festival is directly associated with the season. Chag HaAviv, the holiday of the springtime. And why is that so? If you look at the order of the year, as we've discussed in the past, you see that Pesach is a statement of beginning. That was our beginning from Egypt. Shavuos is our kind of adolescence, where we had to first make our real decisions, take responsibility of the Torah. And then the final phase of the holidays is Sukkot. We know that that's a very existential holiday, where we read Hevel Havalim, that there's emptiness, that the world and life is quickly. And what's that referred to in the Bible? Excuse me? That's referred to as the time of the final ingathering, the time of death, of returning to God. But Pesach represents this freshness. Pesach represents this birth, not only of the nation, but of our very being. And by the way, what month does it take place in? Nisan, which, if starting from the order of Tishrei, is the 7th month of the year. And starting from the order of Nisan, the 1st. Again, going back to this theme, that the number 7 means our ability to reach that bridge of connecting with Hashem Yisbarach, connecting with the Holy One. We wash our hands because there's a law that whenever you have a vegetable or a fruit that's wet, you have to wash your hands without a blessing. That we discussed last night. And you make a bracha on the fruit, Bari Pri Adama, and one should have in mind, just to interject one statement of halacha, one should have in mind at this point this bracha should also go on the maror, the bitter herbs that you're going to be eating later on. The bracha Bari Pri Adama should cover in your mind, and if you're leading a seder, you should announce it, that this bracha Bari Pri Adama goes on the maror, the bitter herbs, which will be had later as well. So if you're leading that seder, you should make an announcement, right? Don't use a bell. You should make an announcement. This bracha Bari Pri Adama should cover the bitter herbs as well. And then you dip that, before you make the bracha, you dip it into salt water, which is a direct contradiction with springtime. Salt water represents tears, crying, sadness. So we're taking that which represents springtime, vibrance, life, and dipping it into sorrow. And then we break the middle matzah. The matzah itself represents a contradiction. What's the contradiction of matzah? It's supposed to be food and you can't digest it. Right? That's one contradiction. But what's another contradiction in matzah? On the one hand, matzah is called the bread of affliction, right? And we all know what that means. Right? But it's called the bread of affliction, right? It's lechem onin. On the other hand, it's referred to as what? The matzah freedom, symbol of hope. This is what the Jewish people carried with us when we left Mitzrayim, when we left Egypt. So it's a direct contradiction. On one hand, it's freedom. Bless you again. You have to cut that out. On the one hand, it's freedom, and on the other hand, it's slavery in the very same item. In the very same item. And if you think about it, what's the difference between chametz and matzah? What's the difference between chametz and matzah?
One's 11.
One's 11 and one's 12?
One's been allowed to rise, and one is...
Let's get a little bit more technical. You're right. Let's get a little bit more technical. Could you have something that looks like matzah and be chametz? Of course.
Yeah.
How?
Well,
It didn't rise. The difference between chametz and matzah
5 grams.
is 1 second time. The difference between chametz and matzah, what is matzah? Matzah is a combination of flour and water that was rolled and shaped and put in the oven and baked, all within 18 minutes. If you do that, it's matzah. If you put it in the oven and it's 18 minutes and 14 seconds, it's chametz. It's chametz. The whole difference, the whole distinction between chametz and matzah could be 1 second. 1 second. So that makes you free? No, that's the point. Time can be your master, or you can be its master. You can realize your ability to hold it and to sanctify it, to be makdish zman with performing mitzvot, and the mitzvot of time, or you become a slave to time and try to play beat the clock, and you know what? You'll never win. You'll never win, because time always robs you. If your life is pushing against time, you're going to be robbed. Promise. Guaranteed. So the difference between chametz and matzah is 1 second. So the matzah does represent either freedom or slavery, but it depends how we deal with it. Depends what we do with it. Depends how we redirect it. And to show this double representation, we go ahead and we break the middle matzah, the yachatz, the next part of the Seder. And we break it into 2 parts. The larger part and the... Very good. Just want to see if everybody's following. You must remember from last year. The larger part we set aside for afikomen. The afikomen represents what? What does the afikomen represent?
Dessert.
Dessert. What type of dessert? Some say it represents the korban pesach, the paschal lamb. Some say it represents the korban chagiga, the festival offering. It represents one of the sacrifices. And the paschal lamb had to be eaten al hasova, when you already were not hungry. Think about it. Here, again, what we have is eating as a central part of the ceremony, but not eating because you're hungry. Eating because God said so. That the entire aspect of the eating when it comes to the afikomen should be, I do this because this is the commandment of God. This is the fulfillment of God's will. And the ability to recognize the importance of sublimating our will to make it the will of God is intrinsic to this process of eating. But again, back at the matzah, we have a larger part that represents one of the sacrifices, probably the sacrifice of the korban pesach. We have a smaller part that represents suffering and slavery. The smaller part remains. What do we do with the larger part? It's put aside and hidden. It's supposed to be hidden. You make a game with the kids. Either you have the kids hide it and you find it, or you have, my wife usually gets it and holds up for some large piece of jewelry, which I'm more than happy to make out of chametz. When, you take a little Play-Doh. But
add lots of yeast to it.
Yeah. The reason that we hide it, first of all, there are many things we try to do during the Seder to attract the children's attention, to be colorful, and to not make sure they overset the whole table. But there's also a theme here as well. That which represents the korban, the ultimate sacrifice, that which represents our return to the days of the temple where we'll actually eat from the animals of the korban pesach, that is elusive. It's hidden. And by being instructed that we have to go look for it, it means that part of the Seder is a search. Part of the actual Seder is a search. To be able to find in the context of the Haggadah, in your experiences in the history of the nation, how to grasp the redemption of the future. Because the Seder really begins after you get to the breaking of the matzah. We have a very difficult paragraph, and I'd like to study that for a moment. On page 8, halach ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction. De'akolo avosonu bi'ava d'mitzvah. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Kol dechfin yaseh v'yachol, that whoever is needy, or whoever is hungry, dechfin yaseh v'yachol, let him come and eat. Kol detzrich yaseh v'yifsach, whoever is needy, let him come and partake of the korban pesach. Hashata halcha, this year we're here. Hashana haba'ah be'arad Yisrael, next year we'll be in the land of Israel. Hashata avdei, this year we are servants. Hashana haba'ah b'nei chorin, next year we'll be free. What does this paragraph mean? What are we saying here? We're inviting guests. First of all, the paragraph is written in Aramaic. Right? The Haggadah is written in general, the Haggadah is written in Hebrew. Right? Translated from the original English, on the left side is the Hebrew. The Haggadah is written in Hebrew. And yet, we have this kind of paragraph thrown in, Halach ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction our ancestors ate in Egypt. Anyone who's hungry, let him come and eat the Korban Pesach with us. Anyone who's needy, let him come and partake with us. So you're inviting people. First of all, it's kind of late to invite people. You already made Kiddush. And what a very, very wonderful invitation. This is lousy bread. It's the blood of affliction. Come and partake with me. It's like saying, my wife, it's not true, I'm being taped. It's like saying, my wife is a lousy cook. How about joining me for lunch? Holach ma'anya. This is this terrible bread of affliction. Come and join me. And then the last line is a total non sequitur. What does it mean? This year we're here, next year we'll be in Israel, this year we're slaves, next year we'll be free. What does it have to do with inviting people? What's going on in this paragraph?
Well, not all Jews are free. And we identifying the brothers and sisters who aren't free.
You think it's talking to just the Jews in Ethiopia, or the Jews in still remain in the Soviet Union, or in Syria, or elsewhere? Who's it talking to? It's talking to all of us. Because Holach ma'anya means that this paragraph was written where? Babylonia. In Babel. In which the Jews were meeting their first exile from the temple. So there's a big question. What are we going to celebrate now? Freedom? We're enslaved. We're in exile. We're suffering. So it's really a question. Holach ma'anya. What are we celebrating this night? We're still eating the same bread of afflictions that our ancestors have lived through. So the address has been changed. So what? That was in Egypt. This is in Babel. We're still in Galus. We're still not totally free. The answer is, if we bring hungry people in, if we get together, what was the message of the Korban Pesach? How did the Jews have to experience freedom? The Korban Pesach is a unique sacrifice. It couldn't be eaten except by a group. You had to bring in your family, you had to bring in your neighbors, you had to connect to other people. Slaves have a habit of fending for themselves. It's a survival mentality. The first thing the Jewish people had to be told is you cannot experience freedom unless you get together. And then, if we can get together, if we can taste the Korban Pesach in our mouths, if we want it so much, I mean, what type of v'yifsach? What type of Korban Pesach did they have in Babel, in Babylonia? They didn't. They did not. So what do you mean v'yifsach? If we can taste it now, if we want it badly enough, if we want to get out of exile sincerely enough, then we can. That's the promise of the Seder. That's the promise of the Haggadah. Hashata Haka. Yeah, this year we're here, but next year, if we wish it, we can be in Israel. This year we're slaves, but next year we can be free. So Holach ma'anya begins the Haggadah with a different type of underlying question, and says again that the mystery of the Seder that is that in the context of the total Haggadah, you can hear yourself seeking and reaching out for your own individual freedom.
Yeah, but what do the Jews in Israel say? They're already there. So do they say, next year we'll be free?
They say the next year will be in an Israel which is rebuilt, or in an Israel which is redeemed. Because even Israel today is a little bit not redeemed yet. I mean, we know that well. We know that all too well. And we're still struggling. And that sorrow is just a manifestation of the spiritual absence of the Holy Temple, where we will have the direct presence of God in the coming of the Mashiach. So this question is a question that tells us that there's a search for the Seder. That the Seder is not merely a historical footnote of what happened to the ancient Jewish peoples. The Seder is a statement of what we have to search for and the steps we're obligated to take in order to reach forward to the future and have that future redemption. And therefore, if you look at the Manishtana makes a lot better sense also. Why? What's the Manishtana? How is this night different from all other nights? You know, there are many questions that you could approach and put into the Manishtana, besides the 4 questions that are there. You can ask, why did we just wash our hands without a blessing? You could ask, why do we have 3 matzot? You could ask, why do we have the whole Haggadah to begin with? There's so many questions that could be approached in the Seder. Why these 4 questions? And you have to really, this is one of the important reasons to have a Seder, have a kind of a set script. Because then the kids will ask, how come we have Uncle Louie? You always say you don't like him. You have to be very careful. But why these 4 questions? I mean, how come on Sukkot? How come on Sukkot in Michigan we don't ask, why are we sitting in the Sukkot? It's 40 degrees. It's pure kashas. They're really one. It's really all rolled up into one question. And that is, why is this night different from all other nights? You see, if we were just eating matzah, if we were just eating bitter herbs, that doesn't throw us. We have holidays or commemorative experiences in the course of the Jewish year, which represent suffering, where we use symbols to remind us emphatically of the suffering and what we're missing. Tisha B'Av, we sit on the floor. There are days of fasting. But that's not strange to us. The last 2 questions by themselves are also not really difficult questions. Why do we dip our food? It's a sign of luxury. Why do we recline? It's a sign of freedom. And there are holidays in the course of the year that emphasize our freedom, our luxury, our control. Those 2 questions by themselves are not really troublesome. What's the real question? Where do we ever have another night, another holiday experience where on the one hand we're commemorating slavery and suffering, and in that very same experience, at the very same time, we're commemorating joy and freedom? The question is, why is this night a night of paradox, a night of contradiction? And it's important to express that. That's really what the 4 questions mean. That's the insight of the Abarbanel, but it's very correct. That's really what the 4 questions mean. Why is this night different? That on the one hand, we have 2 aspects of suffering. The 2 questions represent suffering, matzah and bitter herbs. And then when at the very same time we're doing that, we're dipping as a sign of luxury and reclining as a sign of wealth and freedom. Where in the same holiday do we have these 2 opposite themes hitting together? And the answer is, and the children usually give you 14 seconds to answer the question. No, stuff like that. The answer is, Avadim hayinu l'Pharaoh b'Mitzrayim. We were servants to Pharaoh in Egypt. V'yotzienu Hashem Elokeinu misham b'yerchaz hakol z'ra'av, and God brought us out. And God brought us out. This is what we answer the Holach Ba'anya as well. We take in the karpas, the vegetable, which is a sign of spring, sign of vibration, a sign of that which is exciting, vibrant. We take that vegetable and we dip it into sadness, into salt water. Because there's vibrancy in the world. But as long as we're still living in this night, in this galut, in this exile, and night is a biblical message, a biblical statement of exile, as long as we're still in the context of exile, then we're still halach manya, we're still eating the same bread of affliction. But if you study the Seder well, if you study the Haggadah well, if you study the history and the Torah and the laws of the Jewish people, you'll realize that embedded within that redemption was a promise for a future redemption. When you tell this over to your children, you have the sipur, you have the intellectual involvement in the past, but v'Haggadah levincha bayom mahu leimor, on that day, you have to tell over to your son, saying, Bavor Zeh, this is what God did for me. That in that historical experience, I see myself. Because what were the statements of the redemptive process for the Jewish people? You know, we have 4 cups of wine. We have 4 statements of redemption. And yet we know that we also have a 5th cup of wine and a 5th statement of redemption. The 5th cup of wine is the cup for Eliyahu, right? Eliyahu Navi. The 5th statement of redemption, what are the 4? What are the 4 statements of redemption? Votzeiti, God says, I will bring you out of your servitude. Vitzalti, I will save you from your suffering. I will redeem you from your being slaves, and I will take you to me as a nation, and I will be to you as a God. The 4th statement, the language of the Lokachti, is a language that the Torah uses for marriage. The 4th statement of redemption is the total communion between man and God. That's the fourth statement. But there's a fifth statement as well. And that's Veheveti. I will bring you to the land. And that statement has not yet been totally fulfilled. That's why, up till the middle of the Seder, before the meal, the emphasis is on what was. History. Seeing in the context of that history the promise of our future freedom and redemption. But once we engage in the meal, once we engage in the halachic process of taking God's world and ingesting and integrating into ourselves and enjoying it as a commandment of God, then all of a sudden we open up the door. And what do we do then after the meal, after benching? We pour the fifth cup, the cup for Eliyahu. And then we say, Shroch HaMosel Agoyim Asher Leducha. We've been oppressed throughout the ages. Pour out your wrath against the nations who hate you and hate your people. Give us a moment of redemption, a final redemption. And then, while the Hallel that was preceding the meal is the Hallel of Mitzrayim, the Hallel of the Jews leaving Egypt, that changes personality and course to the Hallel of the future. The Nomar Lefonav Shirah Chadasha, and then we're in the position to sing a new song, a song of newness, of renewal, that we learned from the other ones. Picking up the chords of the song of the Hallel of Mitzrayim, we're able to pick up that tune and replay it in enough intensity that it sings out the Hallel, the praise for God of the future redemption of Klal Yisrael, the coming of Mashiach. So that's why the Seder is divided up into those two parts. There's a past, but we have to learn from the past. And then there's a future. And if you see that some of the stories that relate to this, let's, for example, turn to page 10. Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Sha'ayim Misubim B'nei Brak, all of these great rabbis were meeting in Bnei Brak. These were rabbis under what era? When did these rabbis live? They were under the Roman occupation. Rabbi Akiva, as you well know, was martyred as one of the 10 Kedoshas, one of the 10 martyrs, because he refused to give up teaching Torah. This was under the Roman occupation. So if there's anyone who can speak about suffering and slavery, were these rabbis meeting together under the oppressive thumb of the Romans who tried to destroy our Judaism. Mitzrayim, excuse me, Kol Oto Halayla. And that entire evening they spent talking about the exodus of Egypt. What entire evening? Not only the evening of Pesach, but in their night, in their exile, in their suffering. At Shabbat Talmidehem, until their students came, V'amrulahem, and said to them, Rabboseinu, our masters, Higiaz man kriyat shma shel shacharis. The time of the shacharis shma has arrived. The time of reciting the shma of the morning has arrived. What are they saying? They didn't know what time it was. They didn't see the light coming out. There has to be light out to say the shma. What were they saying? It's a time of redemption. There's a morning after the nighttime. There's a redemptive process. And the object of the Haggadah is to recognize that we're still slaves. We're still in exile. We're still eating in our own way the bread of affliction. We have what to reach in standing on that bridge and walking forward to reach Hashem, the middle of the Haggadah. But if we can find unity amongst ourselves, if we can find the ability to integrate the Torah into our very being and ingest it kahalacha, then we'll have this capacity to be redeemed in a total redemption. And that's why we have the following statement. On Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah on page 10. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, Harini kiven shivim shana. I am like a person 70 years old. Why did he say I'm like a person 70 years old? He was 18 at the time. but he got a position as a shul rabbi. Right? He aged quickly. First meeting of the board. Actually, the Gemara discusses in Brachos, the Gemara discusses his being appointed because of a particular political problem that existed, and he was a big Talmid Chacham, but people would say that he was too young, and overnight a miracle happened and he aged rapidly. I don't think that's so unnatural in certain positions. I've named my gray hairs after different members of different balabatim, and he said the following: Lo zachisi shete omer yitziat Mitzrayim baleilot. I did not merit to know the source of the mitzvah of recounting the exodus of Egypt at night. Remember, there's a mitzvah every single day to recount the exodus of Egypt. We do it in the Shema. That's why we add on the last paragraph, the Parsha of Tzitzit, to the Shema, because it has the end of the Shema is what? Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hotzetzi aschem me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. But he wasn't sure if you say that at night. Until Ben Zoma came along. And he said, the Pasuk says that you should remember, Leman tiskor es yom seischa me'eretz Mitzrayim, you should remember you're going out from Egypt, Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of your life. And Ben Zoma said, look, why does that say all the days of your life? Why doesn't the Torah just say the days of your life? The days of your life means your whole life. Right? That was before there was a copyrighted soap opera with that name. Isn't it? Days of your life?
No, all the days of your life.
Kol Yemei Chayecha. Oh, that's on Channel 2. We're switching channels. Kol Yemei Chayecha. What does it mean? Why does it add the word kol, all the days of your life? Yemei Chayecha Hayomim. The days of your life, that refers to the days. Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of your life, by adding the word all, Halelot, that includes the nighttime. The Chachamim Omrim, the Chachamim, you understand, that was Ben Zoma's reasoning. From the word all the days of your life is a reference that's not only in the morning, but also at night. There's a mitzvah of recounting the exodus from Egypt. Comes along the Chachamim, and they argue. Yemei Chayecha Olam Hazeh. The days of your life refer to this world, before redemption. Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of your life, Lahavili Malsa Mashiach. That comes to include the time of Mashiach. That even after Mashiach comes, there'll be a mitzvah to recount the exodus of Egypt. Now we don't hold like the Chachamim, we hold in this case like Ben Zoma, which means what? That means that there will not be a mitzvah of recounting the exodus of Egypt at night when it's no longer night, when it's no longer a time of exile, no longer a time of suffering. Because the purpose of recounting the exile is to see how we can rid ourselves of this night, how we can get beyond the exile of today. So we say it at the physical night, but unlike the Chachamim, we will not say it at the time when spiritually the light of the world is considered to be a day. And I mention night and day because throughout the Haggadah there's a great deal of reference, and it was in the middle of the night. And if you think about it, being in the middle of the night meant that in the long, dark process of Jewish history, there'll be many nights. When Abraham was shown in the Bris Ben Absarim, when Abraham was shown the future of the Jewish people, the Torah describes it as the Eimach Hashecha Gedol Nofel Esalam. A dark fear, a depression fell upon him. And it got dark. It got dark. But as we know well, when we studied that in Parshat Lech Lecha, what did we recognize? That the way the Torah describes the darkness is that the sun was yet to come. Vayihi Hashemesh Lavo. The sun was yet to come. Namely, Vayihi B'chatzi Alayla, many things happen in the midst of the night. But how do you get through the rest of the night? That's the ability to see that the sun is there, but you have to be able to pierce through the darkness. That's the reference. Vahi Hashem Lavo. So there's an obligation to say the Yetziat Mitzrayim at night. Pesach, the Seder, is a mitzvah, which is at night, because the purpose... Oh, okay. The purpose of the Seder, I just thought it was one of the train stops. It sounds like the IRT screeching. The purpose of the Seder is to be able to search for our independent freedom, our individual freedom that comes with our total connection with Hashem. And therefore, that search for the Afikomen represents that the Seder itself is a sense of searching, a sense of reaching out for something, looking for something. Not the little broken matzah which represents suffering, but the other part of the matzah which represents true freedom. Freedom to have order and sense of communication and connection to God and to the people in our lives.
Is that the ability to have order is freedom from chaos?
The ability to have order is freedom from entropy. It's freedom from the lack of thinking. The Seder is a confrontation, an intellectual confrontation. The more you get into it, the better it is. The more you can understand, the better it is. Because the bottom line for freedom for a Jew is not our hot tub Seder that we were talking about in the beginning of the class. See what you missed? Not that jacuzzi Seder, right? That's just for a whirl, but that's not it. Seder means order. And in the context of ordering your life and setting priority and agenda, in the context of thinking, the Jew finds freedom. Not the context of hanging loose and just doing whatever blows through your head. In the context of confronting and thinking and realization and seeing yourself in the context of that Seder, that order of the Jewish people, of thousands of years, of our connection to God and His Torah. In that Seder, we find our ultimate freedom. It's like the matzah we said beforehand. You can become the master of yourself, or you can maintain yourself as a slave. The only difference is direction. Just like we spoke about the matzah in the beginning. And this theme continues in the next paragraph. Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. Blessed is the Makom. Makom means what? A place. HaMakom means the place. It's a very interesting language because it means it's a reference to Hashem, of course. Blessed is Hashem. Blessed is Hashem. Blessed is He. Blessed is He who gave us the Torah to His nation Israel. Blessed is He. And these four statements somehow Kineged Arba Bonim Dibur Torah. These four statements are parallel to the four sons that the Torah speaks about. One wise son, one wicked son, one simple son, and one son who's not even capable of asking the question. Why this language? Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. Well, because it's printed in the Haggadah. Okay. But why does Haggadah use this language? And how does this language represent the four sons? Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. Baruch Shenasan Torah Le'amo Yisrael. Baruch Hu. Let's look at the four sons. The first son is the Chacham, the wise son. What is the name of God, HaMakom? When do we use that name of God? Anybody think of any examples when you use the name of God, HaMakom? Right. The specific phrase for comforting mourners is HaMakom Yenachem Eschem. God should comfort you. Why do we use the word HaMakom? HaMakom means that God's really every place. The ultimate place, the ultimate location of being is within God. He's HaMakom. Why do we use the phrase HaMakom for the Avel? Because HaMakom represents the need to see beyond the veil of darkness and to see that God is present. To see that there is not a place without God. You might have to pierce through darkness, a great deal of darkness, a great deal of night, to see that. But if your perception is honed to reality, you'll be able to see it. So the Chacham is a person who's wise. What's really wise, what's really wisdom? To look beyond that which greets the initial perception of the individual. To be able to perceive beyond that which greets our eyes. So we tell a mourner, Hamakom, that God is there. And when you're comfortable with again searching for Him, rest assured He's there. Matter of fact, one of the things that we say, according to the Rambam, is that when we give the greeting of Avelus, of mourning and comfort, we say Eschem, to you, in plural. And some people have the custom of saying it even in plural, even if there's only one person there, only one mourner. And the commentators explain because there isn't a time, and especially at grieving, that God isn't with you. He is also in grieving. He's there. So we say, Hamakom Yinachem Mitzvah. The real comfort for you will be when you have the ability to recognize the presence of God by it. The Chacham has that capability. And what do we say to the Chacham? The Chacham wants to know everything. He wants to know details of law, edus, chukim, mishpatim. He wants to know the nitty-gritty. He wants to understand in depth all of the aspects of law of the legal system of the Jewish people. And what do you tell him? Here, this philosophical searcher, what do you tell him? Ein maftirin achar pesach afikomen. You tell him that after you eat the afikomen, no more dessert. Here he asks these brilliant questions. He wants to know it all. And you tell him, Ein maftirin achar pesach afikomen. What does that mean? Some say very simply, you tell him soup to nuts. You tell him all the way up to dessert. That's the easy way out. Doesn't say it. Somehow, in the Ein Maftirin Achar Pesach Afikomen, we have a secret. We have a very important statement. And what is that? Okay, you're telling him something simple, and number one, but number two, you're telling him halacha. You're telling him halacha. The first step is, the Chacham can see God in the context of din, of law. The Jewish people's perception of God, historically, from the 3,600 years of our receiving the Torah, has always been to perceive God through the details of His legal system. That's a perception of God. Not just to think and philosophize, but to integrate into ourselves and to see in the context of the nitty-gritty, the details of law, to see God. Many of the philosophers throughout the history of the Jewish people comment on it. No one, until this day, at least until the last 200 years, has disagreed with that point. That din, that Jewish law, is the mechanism for a Jew to see God. That's number one. But why this specific law? Ein maftirin achar pesach afikomen. The afikomen is eaten already al hasova. It's eaten when you're not hungry anymore. Right? In the time of the temple, they would eat the festival offering, and then when they really weren't full anymore, it's like you had your, you go to Sarah's and you get the three-layer sandwiches, right? The Shmuel special, whatever it is, and you already finished that, and now you have to order French fries. Now you got to do it. You don't do it. I don't want to do it. Right? But it's for free. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But do it anyway. Ein maftirin achar pesach afikomen is a reference that after we've done that, there's a limitation. There's a border. God says to you, you eat because it's your mitzvah. Enjoy the world. Participate in the world. But see within it the godliness of it. Eat, and the eating at this point becomes very regimented. You have to eat, and then you stop. And that's life. You partake of this world, and then you stop. And what you're left with, and how you did that mitzvah, and how you ingested that world into yourself, that will determine who and what you are when your soul goes back to God. After you eat your afikomen, that's it. That's your dessert. And if you can, in the context of your life, see that and recognize that, that's wisdom. Then you could see beyond that which casually meets the eye. But the Rasha is different. The phrase that refers to the Rasha is Baruch Hu, a pronoun. Blessed is He. There's a God, but He's impersonal pronoun. Who? And what do you do to the Rasha? when it comes to the wicked son, the son asks you, what is avodah zos lachem? What is this service to you? Lachem below low. He doesn't say of our God. And he only sees it as avodah. He doesn't see in the wealth of Judaism anything but avodah. Avodah is work. Slavery, drudgery. He says it's all avodah. He doesn't see its beauty. So what do you do to him? V'afata hakeat shinav. What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to blunt his teeth. What does that mean? Danny, what does that mean? How do you blunt somebody's teeth? That's like for TMJ, you do a little grinding. Well, what does that mean, hakeat shinav? His teeth are too sharp. Why? He chews his food so quickly that he never tastes what's in his mouth. And the statement to the wicked son is also a statement about eating. Goes back to the wise son. The wicked son's not an idiot. He's not ignorant. He's smart. He knows, but he doesn't appreciate. To the wise son, you say, "Ein maftiun achar." After you finish eating, that's it. You've enjoyed. You've done it because it's a mitzvah, and how you did it will determine your existence forever. How you live life will determine what you will be for infinity. But to the wicked son, you say, you gulped it down too fast. You're going to have life, and it's going to be over, and you'll never have tasted it. You will never have thought to sit and appreciate it, to really see its true beauty. When you think beauty is only on the surface, and it's only what turns you on, then 10 minutes later it's gone, or 10 years later, or 20 years later. So what's the purpose? The ability is to take it slow, to appreciate its real inner quality. Because when you chew a food well, you not only taste the outside, you taste the inside. So the wise son, we say, taste it. You're missing something in this world. You're missing life. If you look, for example, by Esav, when Esav despised the birthright, how does the Torah describe his wanting to eat from the porridge? Hagmieni no mina adam hazeh. Let me gulp it down. It's a language of, I don't want to eat it. I want to stuff it down my throat. That's really the language. Hagmieni no. Let me gulp it down. The wicked son refuses to taste, and we blunt his teeth so that he can't just chew it and get it down, but slowly appreciate life. So in the context of the Seder, we'll conclude now because it's late. In the context of the Seder, we have this message. We have a search for a future redemption, but we have, most importantly, a search into ourselves. To realize the paradox in our lives that we spoke about. Halach ma'anya. We're still suffering. But we can see the promise of the future in the context of the Haggadah, number one. Number two, we live a world of paradox, internally and externally. The ability to put it together and to put our lives together, become whole human beings, requires a search. And that search, when it's found, is the afikomen, is the redemption of the future. We'll continue Mitzvah Hashem next week. Again, we'll probably start around 8:25. Tuesday night, 8:25, we'll continue and conclude our class on the halachot of the Seder. And Wednesday evening at 8:25, we'll conclude our discussion of the hashkafa, the philosophy of the different parts of the Seder. I hope that what I'm saying is specific enough that the major ideas you can pass on during your own Sedarim. Some of these questions and some of these answers, you might try to suggest your own answers to it and try to get as many people involved in it, because the Seder requires kol hamarbe. The more you can get yourself involved and see yourself in the pages, the more successful the program of the Seder is.